Have I ever spoken to you about my childhood heroes, Gödel, Turing, and von Neumann?
Yes, you have, but I would like to listen to all that again.
Okay, well, Gödel and Turing are eccentrics. They're very creative, very unusual people, and I think that mathematics and philosophy, and maybe even physics, after them is completely different than it was before. It's really a paradigm shift, and Gödel was a mathematics student in Vienna in the 1930s, and he loved the nightclubs, the nightlife. That's where he met his wife, and he proved an unbelievable result. It was unbelievable to the mathematicians of the time that basically pulls the rug out from under mathematical certainty. And the result is that there is no theory of everything for pure mathematics. So if you have a mathematical theory, it's always going to be incomplete. And you're going to have to add new axioms to cover new areas, and adding new axioms is always controversial. You can't prove that the axioms are right, because if you could, you wouldn't need to add them. They would be theorems. So this is I think a revolutionary piece of work in 1931, Gödel's incompleteness theorem, that really the mathematics community has not really digested or incorporated or internalized yet. And I've devoted my life to it. I was absolutely fascinated and obsessed by Turing as a child, as a young student. By Gödel, I mean. And afterwards, Gödel was at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey, which is not as lively a place as Vienna. You know, no fabulous nightclubs and nightlife. And there he was best friends with Einstein. People used to see Einstein and Gödel walking in the streets instead of driving a car, talking about philosophy or quantum mechanics. So that's Kurt Gödel. Then a even more revolutionary figure, I think, is Alan Turing. Alan Turing was a mathematics student in the 1930s in Cambridge, and in 1936 he publishes a paper which finds a deeper reason for incompleteness, because he discovers that most things in mathematics are uncomputable. There's no mechanical way, there's no general method of calculating an answer, which is a sort of like a Gödel's incompleteness theorem, but it applies to what can be calculated rather than to what can be demonstrated. And the mathematicians like to claim, or logicians like to claim, that Turing's 1936 paper creates the computer industry. It does as a mathematical idea, because Turing's paper distinguishes between hardware and software. When he talks about a universal Turing machine, that is a general purpose computer, and all you have to do is change the software. You don't have to change the hardware. So this is a flexible machine, a flexible digital machine. And it appears for the first time clearly in this 1936 paper by Alan Turing. Turing then went on to help create the computer industry in England. Meanwhile, in the United States, von Neumann was helping to create the computer industry. Another mathematician, John von Neumann, was helping to create the computer industry in the United States. And both Turing and von Neumann, unfortunately or fortunately, were involved in the war efforts in their respective countries. John von Neumann was actually Hungarian, but he immigrated, like so many scientists and brilliant people from Europe. He fled Europe to the United States, where he was at the Princeton Institute for Advanced Studies as a visitor very often with Einstein and Gödel, and also very often at Los Alamos, involved in the atom bomb project and in using computers to help in that. He had a photographic mind. He could do calculations in his head incredibly fast. He had started publishing papers as a child. He was a child prodigy, but he was the first person to understand how revolutionary the work of Gödel and Turing was. But he himself was not as creative as Gödel and Turing. But he had superb technique, incredible encyclopedic mind, incredible mental speed. So he could see clearer, perhaps, than Gödel and Turing, the importance of their work and the broad applicability of their work. And he worked in so many different fields of mathematics. You know, as a child, I got the feeling that von Neumann could create a new field of mathematics before breakfast every day if he wanted to. So I read a lot of von Neumann. Von Neumann has a book on the mathematics of quantum mechanics, which is still admired by physicists. He did work on the Hilbert program, on set theory, on how to define numbers. He worked a lot on applied math and consulted to the US government and to industry. He's a very interesting character, but he's a more conventional character than Gödel and Turing, who are really strange eccentrics who were not really in the real world. So these were three thinkers that influenced me a lot, that I admired, that I wanted to emulate, that I wanted to understand as a child. You remember, I'm self-taught. I didn't pay attention to my teachers. It was all too boringly trivial at school. So I would do whatever had to be done at school effortlessly, and then I would spend most of my time reading Gödel, Turing, von Neumann, and lots of other people. And I hated textbooks. I wanted to read the work by the original thinkers. And at that time, good scientists or mathematicians, or you could say great scientists or mathematicians, would still write well, and they would write essays that were understandable. Nowadays, I think that happens less, or it's even gone out of fashion in mathematics. If you can write well, it's considered bad. You should only have formulas in your papers. But anyway, then, so I admired these people enormously as a child. They stimulated me a lot. But now, later in life, like Gödel himself, I have come to enormously admire Leibniz. Leibniz is a very elusive figure. He was a diplomat, a philosopher, a mathematician, everything. He was a universal genius, and he actually worked as a librarian also for the Dukes of Hanover. And Leibniz was born in the 1600s and died in the early 1700s. He was a contemporary of Newton, and he had a terrible fight with Newton over the invention of the infinitesimal calculus. Leibniz published first, but then Newton, with the backing of the Royal Society, and in fact of the strength of the British Empire, Newton crushed him to death. Even though Newton published calculus later, he claimed that Leibniz had plagiarized it from him, which is not the case. Leibniz's version of the calculus in many ways is superior to Newton's, which is why continental mathematicians followed Leibniz's formulation rather than Newton's. English mathematicians felt they patriotically should follow Newton's, and this held back the development of mathematics in England for quite a while. Anyway, as a philosopher and even as a mathematician, Leibniz is far superior to Newton, but as a physicist, I have to say that Newton was incredible. Contributions were greater. Anyway, Leibniz is a really fascinating figure because he's interested in general methods, he's interested in deep ideas, he keeps throwing off fundamental ideas in every field that he looks at. And for example, he's regarded as the first person who clearly states the idea of mathematical logic, that you should be able to calculate what is true the same way that you do addition and multiplication, you know, that it should be mechanical, so that then it'll give certainty. Leibniz makes one of the first calculating machines, the first one that can multiply. Pascal had done one could add. And Leibniz invents binary arithmetic and realizes that it's enough. 0 and 1 are enough to represent everything, which is how our modern technology works.